If you're born after 1990, you aren't watching this. But if you were, you'd be wondering who Orm, Cheep and Max Headroom are. Now, if you're born before 1990, you're wondering two things. One, why they made games about Max Headroom and Orm Cheep. And two, why has this boliviating gimp put them together in one video? The answer to that last question, and only that last question will be answered, is this. These games are at opposite ends of the complexity scale when it comes to their controls, and I found it really hard to play any of these titles for very long because of it, so I've put them together, mashed them up, tasty paste. So let's start with Max Headroom. Max Headroom is a difficult thing to explain. He's a fictional AI appearing in multiple TV shows and easily the most 1980s of all 1980s things. And yes, I'm including Radio Rental's Global Hypercolour t-shirts and Sam Fox's Milk issuers in that. Canadian Matt Frewer donned tons of prosthetics and was dumped in a room adorned with spinning neon by the upstart UK Channel 4 in their early days. His job was to link music videos and act as satire on the long-established trope of traditional television hosts. Max would stammer, stutter and glitch throughout all of his appearances. I can sympathise. He improvised and spat out witticisms that would eventually see him attract worldwide attention, finally securing him an American television series. The television series in America did well enough that he stayed in the nostalgic consciousness of those over the pond long enough to make a cameo in the Adam Sandler movie Pixels in 2015. Not only that, his creators, Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel, were given the chance to direct the Super Mario Bros. Movie, and well, I should probably leave that there, shouldn't I?
Well, if that hasn't got Oscar written all over it, I'll eat my invitation to the award ceremony.
Max Headroom was a strange part of television history, all right, and a difficult thing to make a game about. I mean, it's just a head. How would that work? These were the challenges that faced Quicksilver, which gamely took the license on. A follow-on in terms of its plot from the short TV movie that they made about Max Headroom, the computer game, casts you as reporter Edison Carter. Edison is trying to rescue the trapped Max AI from its sinister Network 23 building, which happens to have over 200 floors. There is a lot of work put into creating the world in the manual, with communication sent to Carter giving the reporter hints, acting as the game's instructions. It's a valiant effort in terms of setting an atmosphere that reeks of that trusted dystopian 80s cyberpunk goodness that served gaming well over the last few decades. The game itself, well, it looks a little bit rough and there's a little bit too much going on in that heads-up display. It sort of looks like a fellow cyberpunk game Shadowrun on the Super Nintendo, with this office setting viewed from an isometric perspective. You have to trundle around, opening doors, turning off switches and avoiding numerous goons and wall-mounted machine guns, with the aim, of course, of unlocking the elevator to take you up to the next floor. Hopefully, somewhere along the line, you will find bits of Max's AI code in order to rescue him. And to do that, you will have to solve numerous puzzles and decipher complex codes along the way. Now, this might seem like a simple enough concept, and looking at the game, you'll be wondering what I'm whinging about. And by cripes, it should be a lot simpler. But the controls are as intuitive as nuclear physics lessons at a nursery. They're just horrible. Moving about as it is quite unresponsive, but it's made doubly bad by the fact you have to press the action button to move the little cursor there away from the icon that moves you to other icons in order to operate computers and doors. It could have been made much simpler if you just had to press the action button when you were near a computer, say, or when you were near a door. I eventually got bored of struggling with these controls. They're almost as bad as the ones in Star Wars Droids. There's another video link for you to watch up there about that. And I gave up. But all reports seem to indicate that the game remains much the same for its duration, with all the floors looking fairly identical. So, no, I didn't like Max Headroom, as my little pea brain couldn't take to its controls, and it was overly finicky, and I didn't like it. So Max's personality, unfortunately for me, remains trapped in the presidential suite on floor 211, and I must apologise that I was born with the brain of a chimpanzee. However, you'll have to take that with my mother and the accusations that went against her in the late 70s. The big three magazines, well, they were a bit more positive in their appraisals. They clearly have more time for these archaic controls than I did. Your Sinclair absolutely loved it, a whopping 9 out of 10, and it was given a fawning review by Rachel, who talks at length about the admittedly impressive puzzles rather than give me a nice, neat summing up quote. So I'll just have to talk for a bit just to fill up this airtime while we pan down the page, as is my way. Sinclair User chose to emulate the game's instruction manual for their review, which was quite well done. But again, I'll just have to say that they gave the game a 3-star review and roll my eyes a fair bit. Crash gave it a 85% and declared it an entertaining arcade adventure with plenty to do. At least they gave me a bloody quote. Maybe I'm being a bit hard on poor old Max and should give it another review, but I'm a belligerent old man and I won't do that. I'm not going to play that again. Sorry. Now it's time to move to the other end of the control complexity scale and our good friends Orm and Cheep. Now, naturally, Orm and Cheep, being a bird and a worm, well, they wouldn't be friends, but instead of the usual dynamic of dinner and diner, this show for the under 5s showed children the birds can survive on friendship alone. They can't. He would eat Orm. Alright. Voiced by Richard Briers, Orm and Cheep was a 26-episode series that ran from 1983 to 1985. Cheep was an infant bird that struggled to fly and thus became friends with this subterranean annelid called Orm. They made good friends with some other ropey-looking animal puppets and would try to avoid the malicious intentions of the crow and the rat, who did want to eat them because they're sensible. It's all very quaint and simple and incomprehensible as entertainment now that I'm old, and we'll just leave it at that. Macmillan Software acquired the license to it in 1985, and they commissioned Widget Software to put out a pair of titles, Squeaks and The Birthday Party. And be worried, kids, because they're educational titles. Both of these games are identical in terms of their graphics, their sound, mechanics, and they both came out at exactly the same time. So I'm going to mash them both together as the same game. If anything, Birthday Party is the slightly deeper game, hilariously, allowing a small amount of adventuring using these illuminated signposts. But these are both light fare, both this and Narrow Squeaks. You start the game by slapping a key on the keyboard as the words Orm and Cheep scroll down the screen, attempting to get all 3 words as close as you can to the centre of that red line. From this, the game will determine how smart your 5-year-old or 42-year-old man reviewing old computer games is and adjust the game's difficulty accordingly. And then the game begins and you control Cheep. Is he okay? Look at him. He just does this for the whole 2 games. He's sort of twitching. You know, if he's supposed to be a baby bird, and, you know, the kind thing is to do is to put a spade through his neck, because, you know, his mum's not going to take him back into the nest. Anyway, you start out by being really confused as to what the controls are, and then you figure it out. All the keyboard buttons are exactly the same. Yep, all exactly the same. They all do the same thing. It's all keys and none of the keys. These are the simplest controls in Spectrum history and wouldn't be revisited by the computer game industry until those endless runner games that you would play on your iPhone. I can understand what Macmillan Software were attempting. They were aiming at making the game accessible to small children, so one button makes sense. A good way of getting them into computer games and thus ruining their formative years instead of them going outside. One day they'll be making YouTube videos. Oh. My son at the age of 3 completed the Crazy Box challenge in Crazy Taxi, aged 3. And has gone on to fully complete Mario Odyssey, get all the pieces of the ship in ToeJam and Earl, and procured all the Chaos Emeralds in the first Sonic game. He would be incredibly insulted if I sat him down in front of this game, which has the same control method as a door handle or a light switch. The trouble with doing these games where you're aiming for the lowest possible skill set and the lowest possible, experience with reading and things like that, is that a lot of these games have no explanation at all. And it becomes very upsetting to me that I can't play a game designed for 3-year-olds with one control button. Seriously, I have no idea what you do on this level. One of each of these animals makes a noise, and I don't know when I'm supposed to slap the spacebar. It's weird. It makes me the most pathetic human being in history. I can't play this game designed for 3-year-olds. The atmosphere in this game, though, it all feels weirdly creepy, and that is to its credit. The crow looks incongruously evil with the rest of the game, and so it's fantastically unsettling, and for that I give Widget Software Macmillan some props. Not sure kids will like it though. They won't. They'll cry. Reviews for the two games were mixed. Crash got some kids in to help them review the Orm Cheep games, and they unanimously hated them, and ultimately the game got a poor 42% from that publication. Sinclair User were very forgiving and gave the pair of titles a 4 out of 5 star review, stating that they will appeal to 4 to 7-year-olds and could be a useful addition to the gameplay library. It won't, and it isn't. Don't listen to Sinclair User, they clearly hate your children. As do Yul Sinclair, who gave the game an 8 out of 10, saying that the good, clear and colourful graphics, excellent sound effects, all go to making a solid starter and an educational game. I like the intent of Orm Cheep, but you magazine fellas really do underestimate children. So there you are, the importance of controls. Both Max Headroom and Orm Cheep games suffer from them, perhaps due to a lack of clarity from the producers of these titles when they were making them. Either that or I'm a dribbling buffoon. Either way, I don't like them. I'm miserable. I don't like you, Max. I don't like you, Orm. And I especially don't like you, Cheep. Sort your bloody wing out, mate. K, thanks. Bye.